Hello and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I'm of course your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 240th episode, our guest is Staff Sergeant Aquilino Gonell. Staff Sergeant Aquilino Gonell is a Dominican immigrant, former U.S. Army soldier, and Iraq War veteran. For 17 years, he was a United States Capitol Police officer and was one of 4 police officers who testified before the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection. He's been featured on ABC, CBS, CNN, Telemundo, Univision, and NPR, and in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and El Diario. He is the recipient of the Congressional Gold Medal and the Presidential Citizens Medal. The book he co-wrote with Susan Shapiro, American Shield, the Immigrant Sergeant Who Defended Democracy, was published November 7th by Counterpoint Press. A quick programming note. The interview section of this episode is about 40 minutes long, after which I'll come back shortly to read a quick additional statement from Staff Sergeant Gonell. Then for the last part of the episode, I'll be including Staff Sergeant Gonell's complete testimony before the United States House Select Committee on the January 6th attack, which he delivered July 27th, 2021. And now on to the show. I'm really excited to talk to you. I just finished your book about 20 minutes ago. So it's it's very fresh in my mind.
Thanks for reading it, and I hope you have a little better understanding of I guess what I'm seeking and what I want people to know. So.
Of course. So I mean, but first, before we get into anything, how are you feeling? Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Today was a little overwhelmed because I was near the Capitol today for 4 different interviews, and there was I guess they're working on the building on the west front, and there was making sounds like saying sounds that I heard on January 6th, so that was kind of like bringing me a little bit of flashbacks. But when I came back 3 hours ago, I think I went to the gym, and that kind of like seems to do the trick for me normally. So exercising and being away from the Capitol does me good, so that's a good thing.
What kind of exercising do you do? Do you do any yoga, or you mentioned running in the book a lot?
I do running. I recently started being able to throw the ball, basketball a little bit. So it's a work in progress. So still working on getting all my range of motion, but I will never get them back. So I just have to know my limits and also know my body. When my body tells me stop, then I need to stop and not be as aggressive as I used to before the injury. So I use basketball as a way to heal my body and my mind. I don't know if you read that in the book, but after the 2 surgeries that I went through, my weight went up really high in the 230s. In my normal weight used to be around 182, 179. So now I'm back at the same range. So I lost a lot of weight by just doing running, and also whenever I feel overwhelmed and stressed and anxious, I just pick up a basketball, and that does a trick. I have been using that as my therapy, mental therapy and physical, for a long time, including from the time that the injuries that I sustained from Iraq in terms of PTSD and whatnot.
Can you hold on just 1 second?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I have 4 children, and my wife was my wife was with our 2 youngest children, and she was sitting in the dark, And I forgot to go turn on the light because she turns out the light to put the little kids to bed, but I forgot to go back and turn it off. So turn it on, and she was just sitting in there in the dark. So
No
I don't
problem.
have to attend to that. So
No, believe me, I know how that works. I used to do.
yes, definitely. Well, you mentioned this in the book, but your parents had a lot of siblings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Back then,
That's
back
wow. That's a
then,
lot of siblings.
they used to bear children just to help out with the
Right.
rooms and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
I think that's what the Republicans now want their females here.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Well,
Go back to those good old days, huh?
well, they saw the Handmaid's Tale and they were like, "Oh, that's an instruction manual. That's what we should do."
Yeah, pretty much.
Anyway, but you were, as you talk about in the book, you were born in the Dominican Republic. And for people who haven't been there, like myself, how would you describe it? And also, as an aside, I also got strangely very hungry reading your book, um, because you talk a lot about food, obviously because of you'll get into that, I'm sure, but uh, also talk a little bit about plantains because how much are they like bananas and how do you use them in cooking? I know this is a
Um,
lot to ask in one question, but
I mean, being well, let me start with the latter. Plantains are a kind of like the national fruit, vegetable. I don't know what do you call it, but
sure.
it's a it is a national product. We are proud of it. We actually like and have many variations of style and food and that can be prepared using plantains, either green or ripe. So it varies. It also depends on the region you go to.
Mm,
In terms of my grandparents, they did had a lone family, a lot of back end, a lot of children's, and that's because at that time, you talk about um, the 70s, 60s, and 80s, and even 90s. Back then they used to work a lot in the field, in their own farms, and so it was necessary for them to have a large family. That way, they don't have to pay the on other workers or contractors or things like that when their own family members could do the work.
mhm.
In terms of what was your second question? The third question? I'm sorry.
I'll ask you one question at a time from now on, I promise. Sorry about that.
Um,
No, it's just well, I've never been to the
well,
Dominican Republic or any West Indian country, I guess. What is it like? I have never been.
it's there are like any other country has the good things and bad things. I'm not going to deceive you on that. So upfront, so you have to. It depends where you go. There are safe areas. There are areas that are not so safe, and you need to know and be aware of your surroundings. Just like when we move around here in the U.S., every country has their own problems. One thing that a lot of that we try to do is wherever there's a tourism, and they usually try to keep those areas safe and um, protected. There are the people are very fun and outgoing, very amicable. They are very friendly. So if you want to just have the experience of being in a resort, in the resort, then that's on you. You could do that here in Florida. If you want to mingle with the population and actually get to know the population, then you need to go with somebody that will show you those ins and outs and actually take you around the town and inside the population where you could see how the culture and the people works and how proud they are of the working, how hard workers they are. And it's very different than here. The whole environment, the way they speak, the way they talk, the way the type of food. So you're gonna learn a lot of things if you do end up going. So I encourage you to do
Cool.
so.
Yeah, would love to. Um, but I've known other people whose first language was not English, and I think this topic is endlessly fascinating. But you talk a little bit about this in the book. But do you still dream in Spanish, or do you dream in English?
Um, Dreaming, I
Like I
don't know.
know when you first came here, you
It's
say
been
that you're still doing Spanish, right? Because
I
obviously
used
that's your
to.
inner monologue.
Yeah, I used to dream in Spanish. I mean,
Right.
like now I hardly dream anything because sometimes I'm too
Mm,
tired, sometimes I don't remember. I mean, once I do remember that I used to dream in Spanish in I think 2020, I'm sorry, 2019 when I was doing my NDR mental health therapy. Then I began dreaming again, but that was in English, trying to heal my
mm,
body mentally and remember some stuff. So it did open up some of those memories and blockage
mm,
and things like that. But I don't know, like right now, sometimes what I get is sometimes nightmares instead of
mm.
so, and those are in English from January 6th.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
I could wish that I have any, and then most of the time I don't. But when I do, it's uh, I guess things from related to January 6th.
Sure. Absolutely. Understood. Um, but when you got, what age did you arrive in America?
I arrived here at age 12.
Okay. What was some of the biggest cultural shocks about coming to America?
Uh, well, I came in the winter, so the
Yeah, that'll
trees
do
didn't have no leaves.
it.
I where I landed in Brooklyn, where which
Mm,
at that time there was a lot of violence, crimes, and um, a lot of riots between Black African Americans and well, not riot, animosity between African Americans and Jewish community because they had some problems between them, or perception that because there was somebody got killed and then they retaliated against the other group. So it was kind of like, I'm like, where the fuck did I did I land it?
mm,
Because the other thing is I had to, I'm going to tell you is like, at that age, people, or at that time, many people you used to see the United States as a land where you could become, you know, rich or wealthy. And the things that we used to give back in terms of like how people
mm,
see the United States or talk about the United States was, well, you could pick up the money from the street. They throw things, things are good, and all you got to clean it up. And here I am arriving here in the United States, and all I see is the leaves fall on the ground. I'm like, well, where's the money that they were talking about you find on the street? All I see is a bunch of leaves everywhere, but not money on the street. So that was kind of like culture shock and the language as well. Um, when I first came here, the only three words I knew was America, number one, and plantains. So,
mm,
and once I got to I do remember this where the when I got to the booth and talked to the custom agent, he was like, "Well, looking back, I think I recognize. I remember what he was saying. He was saying, "Are you here for vacation?" And the only thing that I understood about vacation was vacay, which in Spanish means cow, vaca. So like I'm like, yes, we have cows in Spanish.
right.
Yes, we have cows. So that was kind of like interesting and like,
Yeah.
oh, just keep going, just go, just go. That's not what I'm asking, whether you have
No, not
cows.
at all. Um, but yeah, well, you write very candidly about your family. One of the things I always think is interesting about people that write memoir and about their own lives is you end up writing about people that are close to you, and their feelings could potentially be bruised by things you write. How did you deal with that writing about some of the members of your own family?
Um, well, it is the story is about me, not them. So it's
Mm.
kind of like whether they are upset or not, and that's on them. They should have been better towards me.
Oh,
uh,
yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly.
I
This
mean,
happened. This is
I'm
my
just being
experience of it,
I'm just being honest. Whether they feel like they didn't do certain things or do it, or oh
Mm,
wait, was I that bad? Well, I don't know. That's how I felt, and that's how I remember.
mm,
Now, some of those things, obviously, I overcame. Our relationship grew up, and it's up to them whether to accept those things or not. I think we are in a better place,
mm.
but then again, that's on them to figure it
Sure.
out. It's my story. It's how I remember things.
Sure.
And if they have a problem with that, maybe they should have been better
Mm,
relatives.
mm.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. But in the book, you have a really just fascinating chapter on the World Trade Center. You'd been there 4 days before 9/11. Is that right?
Yeah. Actually, I was there on that Friday before.
Wow.
Um,
Talk to me about before, during, and after that time, because you were obviously right there.
um, I was working on a digital photography class assignment. I
Hmm.
mean, I had, I think I had the the negatives from my assignment at that time, because I was doing both digital and regular. That was that transition period that we had around that time, switching a lot of uh, cameras from film to digital. So I did take my digital camera at that time, but I also took my older camera that I have, cheap camera that I bought. And I do have the film from those days still, black and white and color. Maybe I should revisit them, but the the whole thing to me seems surreal because had it been I gone on Tuesday for the following week, then I probably would have perished.
Hmm.
Luckily, um, on that for that weekend, I think on Sunday I began my 17 days of uh, active duty orders for 17 days at the base in the army when my one I think it was my captain or my sergeant she asked me to go in and kind of like train and fix a couple of things.
Hmm.
I needed the money, so I'm like, okay, fine, I'll go, even though that would send me back in school with but the good thing was that they will give me the time to make up something if I was on active duty, and that's what I tried to do.
Hmm.
uh like on that Tuesday, a little bit around 8 or past 8, then I see my fellow soldier, my specialist at that time, he coming rushing down from the second floor and said, "You gotta come quick, come, you gotta see that what's happening on TV." I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And
Hmm.
then the minute I go to the second floor, as soon as I open the door, then the second tower is hit by the second plane. I'm like, what is this? I'm watching a movie or something, and that was scary. That's when I realized we were heading toward home, um, whether immediately or in the next couple of months, and it changed our trajectory because initially I joined the military to get an education, as I mentioned in the book American Shield, and um, you know I think after 9/11 that my education seems a little bit irrelevant given the circumstances and what we were facing. And so I volunteered to to Ground Zero. Fortunately, my battalion commander and my major public affairs, he decided to keep me in the office and making phone calls and try to get in contact with our unit members because obviously they were not on active duty like I was, and they need to be recalled to send people to Ground Zero to assist. Even if they were not needed, they were sending people over just to help the best they can. And unfortunately, they didn't pick me. So I mean, I guess I could be thankful that I didn't go because a lot of people that did win, they ended up getting cancer as a result of the asbestos. And all the illnesses. I don't know if you're familiar with most of the firefighters who had responded to 9/11. I mean, they dropped in like flies because of illnesses. And if John Field and John Stewart both have been great advocating for the benefits of those people.
Yeah, I saw Jon Stewart's testimony before Congress. That was really powerful, for sure.
Yeah. So, and I appreciate that. I mean, I because even though I didn't was picked to go to Ground Zero immediately after my 17 days in the military expire and I completed it. I began to try to get there by my own, by myself. And they were telling me, no, you can't, unless you're a police officer, a firefighter, or TMS, a medical assist for the ambulances. They were not allowing people, or the rescue workers, those people who were digging and looking for bodies and trying to get the wreckage out. Those were the people that were allowed there. So in a way, that kind of like prevented me from doing my part, in my opinion. And I used to buy the newspapers on every Thursday, looking for jobs, especially the Chief newspaper and the Post as well, the New York Post, or the Daily News. At that time, it was like 25 cents or 50 cents that time. So there were a lot of companies that were looking for security guards, and I noticed that, and okay, how do I become a security guard? So I applied. I saw an ad that says we'll train you for it. I did. I think it was 3 days. I paid. I forgot how much I paid, but within a week, I was a trained security guard, and I began my working at Ann Taylor for 2 days by Fifth Avenue, somewhere in Manhattan, New York City. I think that store is still there, but within 2 days after I began there, then they said, no, we need you to go to Chase Manhattan Bank, and that was a couple of blocks away from the World Trade Center site, Ground Zero, and all I could hear is the construction personnel and the ambulance and the police and everybody else working there, because I was outside working for sometime 8 to 12 hours, depending on my school. I used to be going to school full time as well. So all those things change right after 9/11, and even to the point that I kept volunteering, and I ended up going to Iraq in 2003. So
Mm-hmm.
that's part of
Yeah.
the response, and it is what it is.
Right. And you initially were, and I think a lot of people were very in support of the Afghanistan war. It seemed obvious that's where, the base of operations was, I suppose, and that made more sense. You were not, even though you were participating in the Iraq war, you write about how you were not for it while you were there.
I
Talk a little
mean,
bit about that, cognitive dissonance.
in my opinion, I think I yes, I do, that I want to have some type of vengeance against what happened. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I did. But the people that attack us, in my opinion, were not uh, in Iraq. It was Afghanistan, and
Right.
we actually dropped the ball because if you, I don't know if you how familiar you are, but a couple of months later, we were bombing Tora Bora
Mm.
in Afghanistan, and that's where supposedly Bin Laden was hiding.
Mm-hmm.
They came within a couple of 100 meters away
Mm-hmm.
from actually burying him on the rocks in those caves.
Mm-hmm.
We began to make the case for Iraq, the U.S. government
Right.
under the Bush administration and Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. Um, and in my opinion, that we dropped the ball. We took our eyes off the ball and began to, um, allowing resources that could have been better used in Afghanistan, and perhaps would
Mm-hmm.
not had all these things that just happened with a withdrawal as well. So it's a lot of things that could have been done differently.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I didn't have control of any of those things.
Well, sure.
So
Yes. You were not Colin Powell in the situation, so you were not holding up the yellow cake.
yeah.
Um, but you made the transition after Iraq to the police. How was that transition for you? Obviously, that's a little bit of a different job, but obviously requiring some of the same skill set.
um, it wasn't as easy as I thought.
Mm.
I hoped. So. I'm like, well, it should be easy. I mean, I'm trained with the rifles. I'm trained with or with certain responsibilities, and I just spent a year in Iraq, so I think that should count. And when I arrived to the police stations for training, sorry, the police academy, everything's like, no, you need to forget about this thing. This is how we're gonna do it, and we're gonna do it this way, not that way. So it was a little bit of, some things, the physical stuff, like for exercises, were similar to it, but you're talking about two different professions, and one of them was more like, protecting people's rights and um, rights of assembly, freedom, and responding to certain situations. In the military is different. You are trained to neutralize the threat immediately and in combat overseas, and hopefully not here in the United States, but as January 6th proved that through a wrench in our thoughts in terms of like we will never need to be used here in the United States against our own citizens. So I think two different professions. I think it was easier for me because even though I at that time I was relatively already cognizant of my language barriers, but I did overcome or I knew enough of the language that I passed all the requirements. Not because it was given to me, or because I learned how to become better and improve my skills, both I guess the language and also physical and also understanding of being able to speak, hear, and listen, and also thinking in English as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. and you were a Capitol Police. You obviously your last rank was sergeant. You entered as a private, or I don't know what is that
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
private.
But yeah, you obviously rose in the ranks, and you were there for quite some time before all this. I think the most interesting thing about all this is the Blue Lives Matter aspect of January 6th. If I could put one kind of point to it, because of how many police officers were among the rioters, also members of the military, as you write. Um, Also, how many of your fellow officers were at least neutral or sympathetic to the rioters? Um, Talk a little bit about that, because you were there at the front lines, and people are telling you didn't have the experience that you had, and that it was Antifa or the FBI, and it wasn't what it obviously was. Talk a little bit about that, because it's like it's back to blue until it's not convenient anymore for your
Well,
purposes. I mean,
I think they when they say we back to blue, we support the um the rule of law and law and order. Is only they only support that if it is done to another group, not
mm,
themselves. Because if you look at what Mike Johnson did, the Speaker of the House, yesterday, he's like, he's had a press conference where he goes and say in the same sentence, he put, "We are the party of rule of law. We need transparency." And then he goes and say, "Well, we need to blur out the faces of the rioters because they're
mhm,
quote and unquote innocent, and we don't want people to be identified and prosecuted." Tell me again how you support the police. Tell me
mm,
again how you are being transparent. Tell me again how you are pro law and order and the rule of law. If the people who I defended, you and your colleagues in the country, in the democracy, in the capital, were targeting you and your colleagues, and they were trying to kill you, and are you saying that these are innocent people? And and then the former president says, "Well, we need to release the hostages. I'm going to pardon the innocent people have been wrongly prosecuted for January 6th. These are patriots." Okay, so if they're patriots and if they're hostages, what does that make me, the police officer? The
mm.
hostage taker, the sicario, the sequester, um, the bad guy of January 6th? I don't think so. We were protecting the Capitol. We were the one defending the Capitol and protecting them while they were running for their lives on January 6th because they
Yeah.
were scared to death.
And in Josh Hawley's case,
They went.
literally,
They were whipping the crowd and the
yeah.
mob to continue their assault on the Capitol. And when that got out of hand, they were running for their lives. Well,
Mm,
I and my fellow officer, we were fighting for our lives, trying to give them the time to go and run to the hideout, go and evacuate
mhm.
with the time. While we were getting pummeled, while we were getting blows, while we were getting hit, injured, getting tired, exhausted, we bled, we sweated, we cried, we tears, blood, and sweat. That's all we did. And because the action that I took on January 6th, I sustained multiple injuries on my foot, right foot, and on my left shoulder, both my hands, contusions all over my body. And I pay dearly. So whenever they say no, nothing happened, like I say multiple times in my book, American Shield, is nothing happened. And people need to ask this to them. Nothing happened to who? They got to go home clean, safe and sound, with an ego bruise and no injuries, no whatsoever to them, because what we did, we took the brunt of it. We were the one getting assaulted. We were the one that got hit, injured, with even the American flag is still attached to the flagpoles and the poles that we're using as a spear. So we were all doing all those things to give them the chance to come back to and live and come back to work and do their job, thinking that they were going to respond just like the country did after Pearl Harbor and right after 9/11, where the whole country came together. And that was not the case, because immediately after January 6th, when they felt some type of, when they sensed some type of safety on them, they went back at it to continue their defiance, continue their lies, continue their objection to what happened, despite our sacrifices, despite our injuries, despite what they lived, despite that they were the target of the mob. And I don't know what to tell you other than, we were doing our jobs. We did it not because we wanted anything from it. It was our oath. We were trying to protect not only our the elected officials, but we were protecting democracy. We were protecting each other. We were protecting our very governance system, way of governance. When you had the vice president, his wife, his daughter, in the nuclear football, which he carries as, the vice president had to carry it with him. The Speaker of the House is in the building, the Senate Pro Tem. These are the next three people in the line of succession to the presidency. If that's not a national security where they are calling for the hanging of the vice president, they were chanting "hang my pence," not "hang with my pence." It's a subtle difference,
Wow. It means a lot. There's a big difference in practice.
I'm just saying subtle because I guess some people still don't understand that.
Oh man,
hanging with my pence means you're having fun, you are having a good time. Hang my pence means they want to fucking kill you.
Yeah, and they brought a noose and a gallows with them.
Yeah. I guess that doesn't seem to fade him, because he sometimes claimed that president was, I don't think it was criminal what he did on January 6th. I think reckless. Well, how reckless do you want him to be? Mm-hmm. How reckless do you want it to find out when thousands of people were trying to kill you and your family in front of your family? And if it wasn't because of what we did, the officers, I think you would have find out.
But I know it's trite when people say this, and I want to sincerely say thank you for your service, and not just for serving in the military or the police, but for taking the brave and necessary step of stepping forward. And I am going to include the January 6th committee testimony you gave at the end here. I'm going to include it. But yes, thank you for writing this book. People should go read it. And one question I do always ask at the end, because we got about a minute left, what music have you been listening to lately?
I usually just listen to Spanish music, all kinds, the oldies from back in the 90s mostly. I tend to listen to any other things, but I usually just listen to the same thing all over and over.
At this point, the time for our interview ran out, but after our conversation, I asked Staff Sergeant Gonell if he had any additional statements he wanted me to include in the episode. This is what he sent me. Quote, "The book is not just about January 6th. It's about the sacrifices and dedication to duty. I spent 23 years of my life as a public servant in the military and as a police officer, where I protected the country, at home and abroad, faithfully and honorably. I have overcome many obstacles, challenges, and adversities. I thought I had it all figured out. Then January 6th happened. I lost my career, my health, and my beliefs in American principles and values, creating a moral injury as well. I did what I signed up for and kept my oath. Yet those same people I protected, the Republicans, tell me that what I lived through was not real or that it wasn't that bad." End quote. Before I play Staff Sergeant Gonell's complete testimony before the United States House Select Committee on the January 6th attack, I want to quickly thank him once more, along with the other United States Capitol Police officers who testified and continue to speak out. And now here is Staff Sergeant Gonell's complete testimony.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Chairman Thompson, members of the Select Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. It is with honor and heavy heart that I come before you to tell you my story from a painful first-hand experience of what happened that terrible day at the Capitol. I'm providing this testimony solely on my personal capacity and not as a representative of the U.S. Capitol. It is imperative that the events of January 6 are fully investigated, and the Congress and the American people know the truth of what actually occurred, and that all those responsible are held accountable, particularly to ensure that horrific and shameful event in our history never repeats itself. I applaud you for pursuing this objective. Even though there is overwhelming evidence to the contrary, including hours and hours of videos and photographic coverage, there is a continuous shocking attempt to ignore or try to destroy the truth of what truly happened that day, and to whitewash the facts into something other than what they all mistakenly reveal: an attack on our democracy by a violent domestic extremist and a stain on our history and our moral standing here at home and abroad. As a child in the Dominican Republic, I look up to the United States as the land of opportunity and a place to better myself. And from that moment I landed at JFK in 1992, I have tried to pursue that goal. Thankfully, I achieved that goal on many levels. I was the first in my family to graduate college, join the Army, and become a police officer. On July 23rd, 1999, the day before my 21st birthday, I raised my hand and swore to protect the Constitution of the United States. Because this country gave me an opportunity to become anything that I wanted. At that time, I already started basic training with the Army Reserves. In fact, I raised my hand several times in ceremonies to pledge my commitment to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States. When I joined the Army Reserves, when I was promoted to Sergeant War in the Army, when I was promoted during my naturalization ceremony, and when my reenlistment in the Army, when I joined the United States Capitol Police, and lastly, when I was promoted to Sergeant 3 years ago. I have always taken my oath seriously. On January 6, 2021, I fulfilled my oath once more, this time to defend the United States Capitol and members of Congress carrying out their constitutional duties to certify the results of the November 2020 presidential election. To be honest, I did not recognize my fellow citizens who stormed the Capitol on January 6, or the United States that they claim to represent. When I was 25 years old and then a sergeant in the Army, I had deployed to Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom. From time to time, I volunteered to travel on IED-infested roads to conduct supply missions for U.S. and allied forces and local Iraqi population as well. But on January 6, for the first time, I was more afraid to work at the Capitol than my entire deployment to Iraq. In Iraq, we expected armed violence because we were in a war zone, but nothing in my experience in the Army or as a law enforcement officer prepared me for what we confronted on January 6th. The verbal assaults and disrespect we endured from the rioters were bad enough. I was falsely accused of betraying my oath, of choosing my paycheck over my loyalty to the U.S. Constitution, even as I defended the very democratic process that protected everyone in the hostile crowd. While I was at the Lower West Terrace at the Capitol, working with my fellow officers to prevent the breach and restore order, the rioters called me a traitor, a disgrace. I, an Army veteran and a police officer, should be executed. Some of the rioters had the audacity to tell me there was nothing personal, that they would go through me, through us, police officers, to achieve their goal, as they were breaking metal barriers to use as a weapon against us. Or they use more menacing language. If you shoot us, we all have weapons, we will shoot back. Or we'll get our guns, we outnumber you. They said, join us. I heard specific threats to the lives of Speaker Nancy Pelosi and then also Vice President Mike Pence. But the physical violence we experienced was horrific and devastating. My fellow officers and I were punched, kicked, shoved, sprayed with chemical irritants, and even blinded with eye-damaging lasers by a violent mob, who apparently saw us, law enforcement officers, dedicated to ironically protecting them as U.S. citizens, as an impediment to their attempted insurrection. The mob brought weapons to try to accomplish their insurrectionist objectives and use them against us. These weapons included hammers, rebars, knives, baton, and police shields taken by force, as well as bear spray and pepper spray. Some of the rioters wore tactical gear, including bulletproof vests and gas masks. The rioter also forcibly took out batons and shields to use them against us. I was particularly shocked at seeing the insurrectionists violently attack us with the very American flag that they claim to sought to protect. Based on the coordinated tactics we observed and verbal commands we heard, it appears that many of these attackers had law enforcement or military experience. The rioters were vicious and relentless. We found ourselves in a violent battle, desperate to attempt to prevent the breach of the Capitol by the entrance near the inauguration stage. Metropolitan police officers were being pulled into the crowd. We have one right here, right next to me. As we tried to push the rioters back from the breach in the Capitol, in my attempt to assist two MPD officers, I grabbed one by the officer by the back of the collar and pulled him back to the police line. When I tried to help the second officer, I fell on top of some police shields on the ground that were slippery because of the pepper spray and bear spray. Rioters immediately began to pull me by my leg, by my shield, by my gear strap on my left shoulder. My survivor's instincts kicked in, and I started kicking and punching as I tried in vain to get MPD officer attention behind and above me. But they could not help me because they also were being attacked. I finally was able to hit the rider who was grabbing me with my baton and able to stand. And then I continued to fend off new attackers as they kept rotating and attacking us again and again. What we were subjected that day was like something from a medieval battle. We fought hand to hand, inch by inch, to prevent an invasion of the Capitol by a violent mob intent on subverting our democratic process. My fellow officers and I were committed to not letting any rioters breach the Capitol. It was a prolonged and desperate struggle. The rioters attempted to breach the Capitol were shouting, "Trump, send us. Pick the right side. We want Trump." I vividly heard officers screaming in agony and pain just an arm length from me. I didn't know at that time, but that was Officer Hodges, and he's here today to testify. I, too, was being crushed by the rioters. I could feel myself losing oxygen and recall thinking to myself, this is how I'm going to die, defending this entrance. Many of the officers fighting alongside me were calling for shields because their shields had been stripped from them by the rioters. I was one of the few officers left with a shield, so I spent the majority of my time at the front of the line. I later find out that my wife and relatives were here in the U.S. and abroad. Were frantically calling and texting me from 2 p.m. onward because they were watching the turmoil on television. It was now until 4:26 p.m. after giving CPR to one of the rioters who breached the Capitol in an effort to save her life that I finally had a chance to let my own family know that I was alive. After order has been restored at the Capitol, in many hours, I arrived at home at nearly 4 a.m. on January 7th. I had to push my wife away from me because she wanted to hug me. And I told her no, because of all the chemical that my uniform had on. Sorry. I couldn't sleep because the chemical reactivated after I took a shower, and my skin was burning. I finally fell asleep 2 hours later, completely physically and mentally exhausted. Yet by 8 o'clock a.m., I was already back, on my way back to the Capitol. And I continued to work for 15 consecutive days until after the inauguration. I made sure to work despite my injuries because I wanted to continue doing my job and help secure the Capitol complex. More than 6 months later, I'm still trying to recover from my injuries. Many of my fellow Capitol officers, as well as MPD officers, suffer terrible physical injuries from the violence inflicted on us on January 6th. I sustained injuries on both my hands, my left shoulder, my left calf, and my right foot. I already had undergone bone fusion surgery on my right foot, and I was just told that I need surgery on my left shoulder. I have been on medical and administrative leave for much of the past 6 months, and I expect to need further rehabilitation for possibly more than a year. There are some who express outrage when someone kneels while calling for social justice. Where are those same people expressing the outrage to condemn the violence attack on law enforcement, the Capitol, in our American democracy. I'm still waiting for them. As Americans in the world watching horror what was happening at the Capitol, we did not receive timely reinforcement and support we needed. In contrast, during the Black Lives Matter protests last year, U.S. Capitol Police had all the support we needed and more. Why the different response? Were it not for the brave members of the MPD and later on from other law enforcement agencies, I'm afraid to think what could have happened on January 6th. I want to publicly thank all the law enforcement agencies that responded to assist that day for their courage and their support. I especially want to thank those Capitol Police officers who responded on their own from home after working midnight shift. Despite being outnumbered, we did our job. Every member of the House of Representatives, senators, and staff member made it home. Sadly, as a result of that day, we lost officers, some really good officers. But we held the line to protect our democratic process because the alternative would have been a disaster. We are not asking for medals or recognition. We simply want justice and accountability. For most people, January 6th happened for a few hours. But for those of us who were in the thick of it, it has not ended. That day continued to be a constant trauma for us literally every day, whether because of our physical or emotional injuries or both. While it has not received much attention, sadly, many of my colleagues have quietly resigned from the Capitol because of that day. I'm also regularly called by law enforcement officials and prosecutors to help identify from photographs and videos the rioters. And to be honest, physical therapy is painful and hard. I could have lost my life that day, not once, but many times. But as soon as I recover from my injuries, I will continue forward and proudly serve my country in the U.S. Capitol Police. As an immigrant to the United States, I'm especially proud to have defended the U.S. Constitution and our democracy on January 6th. I hope that everyone in the position of authority in our country has the courage and conviction to do their part by investigating what happened on that terrible day and why. This investigation is essential to our democracy, and I'm deeply grateful to you for undertaking it. I'm happy to assist as I can and answer any question you may have to the best of my ability. Thank you.